Hi, welcome to this program hosted by Mashpee Clean Waters. We're a grassroots community. We're really on a collective learning journey. We started in 2019 as we started facing as a town the significant water quality challenges that we have. And we still are holding occasional programs to help residents in Mashpee uh, pick apart the facts and understand some of the complexities of these issues. Today, I'm joined by Rosa Whiting, who has worked on a number of these programs with us. So welcome, Rosa. And also by Sue Dangle. Sue is a very important leader and activist on the issue of fresh waters, which you'll see has been an emerging issue in the years since we first began talking about water quality. So Sue's going to share some of her knowledge tonight. And our goal is to just lay out some of the key knowledge that we've learned over the years as an aid to folks that are thinking about the upcoming votes at town meeting on October 20th and the town election on October 26th. We'll also be hosting a second program 2 weeks from tonight. And that's going to dig more into the project that's being proposed in these elections. But in order to understand, one specific project, it's really helpful to have the overall context. So that's why we decided to hold this as kind of an intro for folks. So the first point we want to make is that this is a generational problem. Nitrogen was a problem in our waters and phosphorus that no one anticipated back when Mashpee began its explosive growth 50 plus years ago. Um, if this happens to be a diagram that was shared in one of our programs, and I should have mentioned that these will be posted at Mashpee Clean Waters. We have a little summary website also on our Facebook group. Every one of these pages has at least one reference that you can go and look at the original source on it. So this was from a program where one of the town folks shared with us. He had found this from 1978. The extensive shellfish that were available. This happens to be Papaneset Bay, but Wacoit Bay back at that time was actually one of the most productive waterways on the Cape, and almost all of that is gone in both watersheds, and so we have a really serious problem in our salt waters. And then now, in the just recent years, we've have a new issue emerging, which is very serious with our fresh waters, and of course they're all connected. So whether we like it or not, we've inherited this problem and we've got to move forward and face up to it. Rosa, you need to unmute.
We are trying to face up to it, but also recognizing that if we don't, the cost of failure is rising. Phosphorus and nitrogen pollution significantly decrease the value of homes in Mashpee, particularly for properties near the affected waterways. The pollution leads to degraded water quality, which reduces the recreational and aesthetic appeal of the town's coastal bays and freshwater ponds, directly impacting real estate values. A Cape Cod Commission study found that for every 1% decline in water quality, the average home values in the region decreased by 0.61%. A similar decline in Mashpee could lead to significant loss of home equity for many homeowners. With the average house in Mashpee valued at $718,000 as of this July, a potential loss then of $4,380 for every 1% decrease in water quality. Polluted waters reduce all our property values. As coastal property values decline due to pollution, the town's tax base shrinks. To compensate for reduced tax revenue, the tax burden may shift toward inland properties, potentially increasing rates for other residents. There are degraded ecosystems and also the aesthetics. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus cause eutrophication that leads to harmful algal blooms and the growth of dense aquatic plants. These blooms block sunlight, deplete oxygen, and create nasty odors and unsightly water conditions, which reduce the desirability of their nearby properties. There's then a loss of recreational appeal. The resulting poor water quality, algal blooms, and fish kills deter recreational activities like swimming, boating, and fishing, which are core attractions for residents and visitors. This obviously has a negative impact on tourism. If water quality continues to decline, Mashpee's appeal as a vacation destination could suffer, reducing tourism revenue and further affecting the regional economy. A degraded ecosystem with foul odors and fish kills is detrimental to tourism, which relies on clean and aesthetically pleasing waters for those recreational activities. So the town wants to avoid costly individual upgrades. Without following Mashpee's wastewater treatment plan, state regulations could require every non-sewered homeowner to install an expensive IA state-approved septic system by 2030, 5 years. The town plan is a collective, long-term solution that avoids placing this burden on individual residents. There are additional buyer perception and market effects. One is called financing reluctance. Lenders can be hesitant to approve mortgages for properties in areas with known water contamination, making them harder to sell. Pollution causes reduced market interest. A property near polluted water is less appealing to buyers, leading to lower offers and reduced interest. Also, a history of water contamination, even if it's been remediated, can create a long-term stigma that could affect real estate resale value. So Mashpee has specific pollution issues. Mashpee's waters are heavily impacted by nutrient pollution. The Mashpee River and the Pompanesett and Wacoit Bays suffer from high nitrogen level, particularly from septic systems and lawn fertilizers. In freshwater bodies like Wakeby, Mashpee, Santuit, and Ashamet ponds, excess phosphorus and nitrogen have led to harmful algal blooms, prompting officials to post warnings prohibiting swimming and other water activities. There is a cost from remediation. Addressing the pollution requires expensive wastewater solutions, such as installing new sewer systems or requiring advanced septic systems. These costs are only going to go up and must be addressed sooner than later. There are public health concerns. Untreated or poorly treated wastewater contain harmful bacteria and viruses that pose serious health risks. Wastewater treatment is one of the most effective ways to prevent the spread of those waterborne diseases. By treating wastewater before it is released, the plan makes water bodies safer for everything. For recreational use, such as swimming, preventing exposure to those illness-causing pathogens. The cost of failure is rising. Mashpee should continue with its wastewater treatment plans to reverse the severe water degradation in its coastal bays and ponds, protect its marine economy, and safeguard public health. Title V septic systems do not remove nitrogen and phosphorus, which are the nutrients causing pollution in our waters. Continuing the current plan is a critical step in a long-term strategy for water quality restoration.
Thanks, Rosa. I'm going to dig in a little more deeply on this issue of nitrogen, just to be clear. Um, a Title V septic does not remove nitrogen. It helps with destroying bacteria, but and puts safe water into our watershed, which, by the way, Cape Cod has one single aquifer under the entire Cape. But nitrogen comes primarily from our urine, and it is not removed in a Title V septic. So it ends up being like a fertilizer that we dump into the water, and anybody that has a Title V septic in Mashpee is contributing to this every time you go to the bathroom. So what's happened is, as Rosa mentioned, the fertilizer, it acts as fertilizer and it stimulated the growth of macroalgae, which then is choking out all the other, the eelgrass, the environment, the shellfish, the fish that were living even just a couple decades ago in our saltwater embayments. So again, if you want more information, you want to understand, here's a great full hour video that we had on a while back and it's on YouTube. And this photo is of LaQuoit Bay showing, and when Brian Howe's an amazing leader, and also a resident of Mashpee, passed away suddenly recently. But he said, this is it. I mean, this is showing that the bay is dying when you have that extent of algae growing in your salt waters. And this was the issue that became the core call to action that was addressed in the original plan, that when we'll talk about that plan in just a minute, back in 2015. But unfortunately, if this weren't bad enough, we've had another issue emerge in recent years. And Sue spends a lot of time advocating around this issue, and I'd like you to talk about that, please. So, Sue, now.
Sure. Well, it was just about 5 years ago that I got my real primer in phosphorus and what it is, because all of a sudden, Mashpee Wakeby Pond, which is the second largest pond on Cape Cod, 750 acres of water, turned a bright green, almost like pea soup for a few days, followed quickly by a number of dead fish floating. And we learned that it's the phosphorus, also coming from septic systems, as you mentioned, that really impacts ponds. It's started to really explode all over the Cape now, and through the help of APCC, there's a monitoring page to show where there are cyanobacteria blooms. But it's very critical for people to know that there is a bloom, because it is so dangerous if it becomes toxic to especially young children who might swallow the water, and dogs who often play and jump around and go get tennis balls and just have a grand time in the water. It can be deadly in dogs and can cause some serious health issues in children and adults alike. So what it does is it gathers itself as molecules in the ponds, and we quickly moved on to getting a diagnostic study of Mashpee Wakeby, since it had never been studied before, to understand how much phosphorus was here. Well, in the December of last year, in 2024, we finally got the report, and the numbers were quite staggering about how much phosphorus is in Wakeby Pond. In fact, the majority of the problem is already here, already in the pond. And it's going to require, I think you've probably seen around during the Maytown meeting, it was discussed doing a dosing study and permitting study for an alum treatment. So alum is going to help, because what it does is it gets put into the water with a binding agent. So there's two molecules that bind together, and then they go and find a phosphorus molecule, and they all bind together and they sink to the bottom of the pond. And then what happens is, because during our spring and fall turning of the lake, where the layers of the lake actually start to turn together. This will help prevent the phosphorus from getting into that turning, and it will keep it down low so it won't get into the water column. And since it has been getting into the water column, what ends up happening is all the algae that's just hanging out is like, hey, here's some really good food. And they eat the phosphorus, and there's so much of it that it can turn it into shocking colors. I think you probably remember some of these photos here. I think this might have been a shumat pond, but it's really gross. It smells terrible, and it's really impacting at least the neighborhood here, where people are actually saying, I'm not sure we're coming down this weekend because we're afraid to bring the dogs. So, and the kids, and the last few July 4th weekends, children who are visiting grandparents or aunts and uncles can't get in the water. And that's a tough thing for a child to swallow. So, I'm pleased to tell you that the Freshwater Initiative from the Cape Cod Commission has been seeking to develop a similar measure like the TMDL for nitrogen for phosphorus, so that we will have some kind of a measure going forward that towns can use as their guideline to getting rid of it. But I mentioned the alum sinking the phosphorus. Well, that's only going to last for a certain time. Over time, in 10 to 15 year time, generally, the binding starts to release, and the phosphorus just starts to be free again. So the only way to get it back down is to put in another alum treatment. So not only do you treat internal phosphorus in a pond, but you also have to find the source, the main source of how's the phosphorus getting in. And that was determined through our study to be coming from primarily the properties on the north side of Wakeby Pond, and mostly from the septic systems. Phosphorus is different than nitrogen. It travels in the ground, and it moves about a foot a year versus a foot a day. So it's a slower movement, but over the time that the development has happened on the north side of Wakeby, all of this phosphorus is just marching in a sense down into the water. So the thought was to tackle sewering those properties. It's a complicated project because that part of town, you drive through Sandwich, then you're in Mashpee, then you drive through Mashpee, you're in Sandwich. So it was really a brilliant idea to try to tuck it in to some land north of Wakeby. And this is a cluster system, which is a primarily almost all underground system that can have a leaching field that will be replanted. And then the system itself, much like a septic system, will be below ground. It's much bigger, obviously, but it will be below ground. And they're going to tuck a building that needs to house some of the machinery into the side of a hill, because this area is very hilly. But they thought this would be a great idea to keep the visuals looking as good as possible. So the last thing I wanted to say is I keep hearing from some people that ponds filter things out and not to worry. These kettle ponds are spring fed. I can't tell you how many times somebody tells me that it's spring fed. Well, it's fed by our groundwater, yes, but there is no spring below ground in a pond. It's the ocean. So the only way our ponds are filled is through stormwater and groundwater. And with nutrients flowing and not being inhibited in any way, we're just going to continue to have the problem until we tackle it. Thanks.
If I may just jump in, Sue, that one of the beautiful things about this cluster system is that it addresses both nitrogen and phosphorus.
Yes, thanks, Mary. That's true.
So we're gonna go into that a lot more in our program next time. But it's almost like we're getting a 2-for-1 here, and begin to cut it off at the source. I've been doing water quality testing for a number of years now. It's part of a program that Mashpee, the tribe, and UMass Dartmouth does every summer. And one of the scientists explained to me that if we don't cut off the source, it'll just keep accumulating. And that's the situation we're in with both the phosphorus and the nitrogen.
Right. And we're at a point now, I think the other point to make is that 75% of the phosphorus that's in Mashpee Pond, which is connected to Wakeby through a channel, 75% of the phosphorus in Mashpee Pond comes from Wakeby. So it really is coming in on the north side and then moving that way. And you can see in the presentations that have been done already on the informational sessions, the how the watershed works and how water is moving. But tackling the north side of Wakeby is key.
Great. So Sue also is going to walk us through some of these these choices we have for remediation.
Right. So there are a number of things that are on the forefront that are very exciting and some things that are tried and true. Um, as you know, the Title V septic has been the workhorse of the Cape for a very long time. But it was designed to, as I think it was Rosa mentioned, really take care of bacteria and keeping people safe from viruses and bacteria and things like that. And at the time, nothing was thought of nitrogen and phosphorus. But because the leaching field takes all the gray water and puts it into the leaching field, that's where all of the nutrients just leach below ground and go right into the groundwater and into the water bodies. So those are really not acceptable anymore. And with the new Title V regulations on Cape Cod, many more towns have opted to do watershed permitting, and Title V septic tanks are out. In their place, if you're not going to be sewered, individual what's called IA, or which is an innovative alternative system, are being used, and there's so many different kinds right now that are being studied. Actually, right here on Cape, over at Mass TC, which is located on Joint Base Cape Cod. It's a fascinating place, and they're doing a lot of work trying to find not only systems that can do a much better job of reducing nitrogen, but there are some that are really up and coming to remove phosphorus as well. And some of them are proprietary at this point, but they are being installed in different places and being used successfully to remove phosphorus. This column CEC with a little asterisk, that's contaminants of emerging concern. You've probably heard of those. They are known as PFAS, and they are forever chemicals. So the Title V septic system and the IAs at this point are not doing that. If we move down the list towards urine diversion, what that does is basically take the urine out of the system altogether and either captures it in its own tight tank in the basement or a tight tank out in your yard. But it does need to be carried away. And most of our nutrients are found in the urine versus the solid waste. So it captures a high amount of nitrogen. It captures a high amount of phosphorus, much more than any of the other two we've talked about. And partially, these contaminants of emerging concern are also carried away. Those are in-home installations, and unfortunately, right now, there's nothing that's really approved in Massachusetts as proper fixtures for this, other than composting toilets or a direct tight tank in some towns. I do know that Mass TC is really excited. They've just received 2 major grants to get their 2-year, 25 home pilot study underway, hopefully in January. And that's exciting because if they are able to prove efficiency, this is a good way to tackle certain parts of towns that are difficult to get to. It has some hurdles about acceptance, but I think things are coming a long way. And the news of the week is that it looks like American Standard is coming out with a porcelain toilet that's a 2-chamber toilet and will divert urine, and it would be acceptable in the United States and could be installed. Right now, we can't install any that are from Europe. But that's very exciting. The cluster system, we've been talking about that. That's what's being proposed for Mashpee Wakeby. It definitely takes out nitrogen. I think that the one we're looking at has been approved by the state for getting it to 19 milligrams, but they have a number of these installed on the Cape, and they're getting much, much better readings. Almost some of them are getting down to 3 milligrams. And with phosphorus below 1, which is very, very exciting. I think I'm hearing about future potential for the contaminants of emerging concern. That's a tongue twister. But they're more suitable for neighborhoods. They're smaller. It's more like a big septic system, as we had discussed. And then treatment plants like the one we've built over on Asher's Path have a very high rate of nitrogen removal as well. They also remove or reduce phosphorus, and they will be able to tackle the CECs at some point. Their filtering system with the membranes and the black lights are very, very hopeful. And they're much bigger, and it's a bigger deal. It's a really big infrastructure project, and those are sectioned in different parts of town. We have one for Pompanesett Bay, and the one for Wacoit Bay is also under consideration, and they had some announcements about that today in the Sewer Commission meeting, if you want to tune into that on the town's website or YouTube or Mashpee TV.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sue. I guess we'll move to the next one, because I think one of the things that we learned in our learning journey as a group was that there were already many plants that were in Mashpee that none of us, or at least I didn't know about until we started exploring this. So this is a slide from again, a long program that we did, and there's actually a description of all the different methodologies and pictures of all the different existing plants. I'll let you take it away, Rosa, and talk about this a little more.
Well, it's the map is a little bit confusing because it does list a proposed town wastewater treatment plant, and it also mentions one that's in one of those little things that we think it's Mashpee, but it's really Katuitt. But as Mary said, Mashpee already has more than a dozen wastewater treatment cluster systems that Sue was talking about. And a lot of people have no idea that these are even there in their neighborhoods. If you look at the list of where these little cluster treatment facilities are, there's a large one in Southport, Mashpee Village, Willow Bend, New Seabury, Mashpee Commons, Mashpee High School, Stratford Ponds, Wampanoag Village, Windchime Point, and South Cape. These are all in people's neighborhoods, and there has been some pushback, with the not in my backyard, people not wanting this kind of a structure near them. But truthfully, many people who even live in these neighborhoods are not aware of them. Sue Dangle, a few days ago, posted a video that she took walking around a cluster treatment system. So if you go on to the Mashpee Clean Waters Facebook page and just go back a couple of days, scroll down, you can see this video of a cluster system that, as Sue said, is almost all underground. And at the September 11th town session, they demonstrated a number of cluster systems which are still in areas used for recreation here on the Cape. So you can visit any of these and see what they look like in your environment. And I think that's all I want to say, except for the one that is proposed for Washpee, Wakeby, Mashpee, is an amphidrome system, similar to what is at South Cape, Stratford Ponds, and Windchime.
And our understanding is that it's even, more advanced because every year the technology gets better on these things. And that's what's so remarkable about this, is that it's just not a big deal having one of these in your neighborhood. Thanks,
And it
Rosa.
is state
Go
of
ahead.
the art, and it is something that, as the town people have mentioned, the flat area where it's underground does have to remain a little bit open, but a relatively small area that can be planted over in grasses and wildflowers. But they showed places where people were having weddings on top of these, cluster systems. This is absolutely usable space. Thank you.
Thanks. So, all those, all these plants were in place. And then when nitrogen became such a clear and present problem in our waters, the town undertook a very extensive study and planning exercise. And, this company that helped with it, GHD Engineering, is still involved as we go through it. But a lot of people cite this 2015 plan and say, some of these things that are being proposed today are not consistent with that plan. And I think, I remember the first time I downloaded it, it was a very old PDF and it's a huge document. But when you read the first page, it's very clearly, it says it's a comprehensive nitrogen management plan, because that was the problem that we were aware of and we were seeing the effects of. And this was something that, if you've seen the center over in McCoy, the Estuary and Reserves Center, that is one of several research centers around the country that were built to try and understand these emerging problems. And so as scientists figured it all out, we then had to figure out, okay, what do we do next? And so there was a very good, solid plan created, but it was only for nitrogen. And as we explained, we now have an equally bad problem with phosphorus. And I actually did a word search in the original plan, and the only mention of phosphorus in that plan was to say this should probably be measured in the future, among many other things. Of course, that came up and bit us later. But the other thing when you read this plan carefully, it talks about quite a few phases, but it also talks about taking a stepped approach, and with each phase, look at how it's going. Is it working? What are the data telling us? And so I underlined this word here because they said it's very important that we understand that this plan has to be using mid-course corrections and what they call adaptive management. And so what we're doing today in Mashpee is exactly what the plan called for. We've started phase one. That wasn't even exactly the way the original phase one was implemented. Phase two is getting ready to get underway. But now, as we add new projects to the docket here and we begin to create changes, you can see we have the opportunity to do things like this cluster system, where we're going to address the nitrogen, but we're also going to address the phosphorus. So that's the good news. And, I'll just comment that a couple other things that have happened since then. It took a while for the town to be comfortable, and both the leaders and the citizens to understand that we had to do this, we had to support it, and frankly, we have to fund it. And but now that we understand it, we have a real consensus in town that we have to keep moving forward, because we'll talk about some of the penalties, and Rosa's mentioned the cost of doing nothing. But we have the base there, and we have a great team, and the town has a staff person overseeing wastewater management. We have a staff person overseeing water quality. They've risen to the occasion and continue to do the hard work every day to figure out what are the next steps we have to take in this plan.
I do want to just add, Mary, that
Mhm.
one of the ways that you can tell that the plan is changing, and Mark Drainville today addressed the wording. It's a DEP word. So this plan is with the DEP. It's been filed with the DEP. So anytime we go off course and tweak things a little bit, it's called a notice of project change. And if you go back to, in particular, if you are interested in the videos, anytime you see a joint sewer and select board meeting, this is when these notices of project change have been done. I think the one that stands out probably to most people is the one in 2023 of July of 2023, where we did decide to move on to phase 2. And GHD presented 9 different options. It was a packed house. People looked through all these different options. And we can do part of 3 and part of 4 and some of 1. And everybody came together in consensus on this option 9. But it was different than what the 2015 plan said. And then again, in 2025, another notice of project change came about, and I don't have all the details on that, but it keeps coming. And I hazard a guess, after Mark hinted at some of the things going on in Wacoit Bay today, we'll probably be seeing another notice of project change as well.
And that's a great point, Sue. But that's a good thing, because
It is good.
if we weren't learning and adapting to what we're seeing in the environment, then we should be mad at the town. So it's good that we continue to try and improve this and adapt it. So yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Well, we have to. As scientific instrumentation gets better and testing gets better, we find more and more things. We're going to be looking at PFAS and microplastics and other things down the line. And so it's very good that this plan was developed to be adaptive. When people mention DEP, that is the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. They are the ones who approved our 2015 plan, who approve all these notices of change. They are also the ones who will impose penalties if we don't do what now is legislated that we have to do, and also what we said that we're going to do. Mashpee has been working to obtain watershed permits for both of our watersheds, the Pompanesett Bay and Wacoit Bay watersheds, filing notices of intent, those are called NOIs, to do so, which provide a 20-year framework to manage nitrogen pollution and to avoid a mandatory 5-year mandate for all individual septic systems to be made into those IA innovative alternative systems by 2030. The town is developing a comprehensive watershed nitrogen management plan to meet those state requirements. These watershed permits are a way for towns with sensitive areas like Mashpee to manage their pollution from septic systems and other sources. So a lot of the language says, just references nitrogen, but it is nitrogen and phosphorus. Instead of having a widespread and costly 5-year septic system upgrade, the town files an NOI to apply for a watershed permit. And that's what Mashpee has done. The permit requires the town now to create and implement this comprehensive watershed nitrogen nutrient management plan. So far, yes, Mashpee's filed the NOIs. By filing these, they've paused that 5-year timeline for all non-sewered homeowners to have to install the IA systems by 2030. So right now, if we keep moving forward, that individual taking on of the problem isn't going to happen because the town is trying to make this much more efficient. Why is this important? It gives you 20 years to upgrade just their septic systems or for the town to implement other wastewater management solutions, such as expanding the sewer service. Without the watershed permit, all the homeowners with private septic systems would have been required to replace them with those expensive IA systems in 5 years. So the overall goal of this permit and the accompanying management plan is to address the nutrient pollution and improve the quality of Mashpee's bays and estuaries. But keep in mind that the DEP can impose those penalties.
Good point. Thank you, Rosa. So everybody always then asks the question, what about the money? So Sue's becoming kind of an expert on this as well. So if you want to chime in here, Sue, that'd be great.
Sure. Well, it's overwhelming for all of the Cape towns, and in fact, all of the towns across the state who are trying to tackle wastewater. We just happen to be really impaired, and we have a strict timeline that we're facing. So, what the state does have as a vehicle to help towns fund these is they have something called the SRF, which is the state revolving fund. And really, it's the only way that you can borrow money from the state and it's reserved for wastewater infrastructure, right, Michaela? A nod, yes. I think so. It's reserved for wastewater infrastructure. But these loans come with a 0% interest, which is over, these millions of dollars that we're talking about. This is a massive savings to the towns. And the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund also relieves 25% of this debt. And we've been told with all of the loans that we've been offered that this money is secure and in hand. So 25% off the top once you start paying back. And the Clean Water Act, I believe this is with the Cape Cod Commission. They also, based on the different towns and how they're structured, they also offer different percentages off, and we qualify for an additional 3.3% off. So when you're looking at the Mashpee cluster system right now is being estimated at $25,900,000, you would be able to take 28.3% off of that as amount that will be forgiven. And the loan will be a 30-year loan at 0% interest. This is a competitive process. And again, if you look at today's sewer commission meeting online, Mark Drainville took us through the process, but it's also a long process. It might actually help to explain why we went ahead with the Mashpee Wakeby cluster system when we were kind of stalled between where are we with Pomponesset, and we want to move to Wacoit, but we have a few problems. We're running into the same thing that other towns are facing, which is finding recharge, which means where are you going to put the treated water? It has to go into the ground where it's not going to do any harm. And it's a tricky wicket right now with some of this PFAS that's floating around in Wacoit and a saturation point over in Pomponesset at the site that we built. So rather than not apply for any money, the town decided to move ahead based on the findings that were coming out with the diagnostic pond study to apply for this. So you apply in July. You only have one shot a year in July, one application. And the applications go in to a group of peer reviewers. There's a point system that you get. And there are all of the towns across the state, and clearly most of the people from the Cape are doing this. All of the towns across the state submit their, it's called a project eligibility form, PEF. They submit it and then they get ranked. The Mashpee Wakeby cluster system was approved for the intended use plan. So the state says these people intend to use this money for this plan, and we agree that these are the most the ones that scored the highest. Mark explained today that you get 500 points right out of the gate if you're taking nitrogen out of the ground, which the Mashpee Wakeby cluster system will be doing. And then also, I think just in talking around this system, because of its small size and ability to sewer difficult areas, could be a good example that other towns could use on the Cape and other parts of Mashpee could use as well. So, so you apply in July. And then you don't hear about how you did until December, January the next year. And then in March, they finalize everything because people say, yes, we're in. And then these go to town meetings in May for people to say, are you going to vote for this? We took a little delay and decided to push it to October this year. But this is the year that we decide whether or not our town is going to take this on. And if we do take this on, the design for the plan is due at the end of October. And it's well on its way to that. That's what we've been working on. And then next year, we will have until the end of July to actually execute the contracts for construction. So this is how it works for all of these projects. It is a tight time frame. It's very competitive. 50% of the towns that applied last year did not get any money. They didn't qualify. So if we give this up and say, sorry, we don't want to take it, then we sacrifice that 0% loan. We sacrifice the 28% loan forgiveness. And we send a signal to the state that, oh, well, maybe we didn't want to do it. And it kind of gives, I think people have been tossing around a black eye idea of, well, what do you mean you don't want to do it? Kind of thing. So it does put us in a negative light. I don't know if it's a bad light, but it would be a negative light. And couple that with, I was at the APCC annual meeting this weekend, and the keynote speaker was Bonnie Heipel, who is the commissioner of the DEP for Massachusetts. And she was, she's a really strong fighter for the Cape Towns and this initiatives. But she just shook her head and said, I can't promise there's going to be much money this time around next year for the July of 2026 application process. So it's a good thing that we got in. It's a great thing that we were approved. And I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to use the money and tackle this project.
Thanks, Sue. But we'll show the dates at the end here. But again, if the townspeople don't vote to support this, then all that work goes out the window. And yeah, maybe even the chance for the future funding like this. So
at least in the near term, I would
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So the last point we want to make is, I think, a message of hope. And again, this is Brian Howes. Dr. Howes, as I mentioned, was a resident of Mashpee. He was so critical in developing all the knowledge to support this. And he said a lot of wise things to all of us over time. But I had one conversation with him that I've always come back to, and I remember. He said that the solutions require three groups of people. You have to have the scientists to have the data. You have to have the town leaders to do their work, to do the diligence, to do this extensive planning, as you've gotten a sense of all the work that the town staff and consultants continue to do. And then the public, and we all need to be moving forward together. And really, that's the spirit of these programs that we've been doing. And then, as I talk about water to people, everyone always asks, and I'm sure Sue and Rosa, you have this happens. They say, well, will we solve this in our lifetime? And we're not going to get back to where we were 50 years ago, in a short period of time. But if it was described to me like a garbage dump. If you just keep putting garbage on the pile, you're never going to be able to solve the problem. But if you take away the source, you begin to give nature just a little bit of room to heal itself. The plants can come back, the fish and the shellfish can come back. Once we have our waters a little cleaner, there's already a lot of oysters, but shellfish can clean a lot of the salt water. It's on this video, and there's a link here. He said, once we remove the sources, we will begin to see healing in as few as 3 to 5 years. And we're going to see significant progress in 10 years. And that's a really, really encouraging fact that I think we all need to keep in mind, and we need to keep reminding ourselves and our neighbors that this is not an impossible task. It's a hard task. There's a lot to it, but it's something that we can accomplish if we all continue to, do our part, especially as the public, to support the great work that's being done by the scientists and the town leaders. So if I may, I'm just going to just describe to you a few other resources that are available for folks, and then I'm happy to take questions with the time we have left. Up here in the corner, it talks about the sessions the town is doing at Town Hall, on our on Facebook group, on that webpage we have, or on the town website. You can find the information on this, but you go to Town Hall on these dates at 7 p.m. and you'll get more information about the cluster system. But we're going to go ahead and do another program on October, was it the 9th? But my Zoom window
October
is
9th,
blocking
yes.
it. Yeah. Where we're going to give you a lot more background on, these changes that have happened since 2015. Sue's been working on a timeline to show all those changes in the adaptation of the plan. And then a little more detail on all these projects that are coming up, including the work that's, as we mentioned several times, is underway to try and figure out how can we get started in Wacoit. This is available just like you did before. You can register at Mashpee Clean Waters or on that website that we've created. This program will be on YouTube, and we invite you to share it. Rosa, Sue, any other comments, or we can ask if anybody has any questions?
I just have one comment, and that is that we are all in this together. And many people have already gone through phase 1 and are hooked up. Where I live in phase 2, it's beginning very soon in the upcoming weeks. We're excited to be a part of the solution. And I hope that everybody in the town will continue to be moving forward because we love this area. That's why we're here.
Thanks. Sue, any last words?
Oh, I'm excited. I heard today again at the sewer meeting that 108 homes are now hooked up. So just even a few weeks ago, it was only 58, and now we're at 108. So they're coming on, and things are going well. Working out a couple tweaks here and there, but I also was sitting next to the building, actually the plumbing inspector, and he just reported, off the top of his head, he's like, people are so happy. They're just so happy. that they're on sewer and they don't have to worry about their septic system anymore. So it's a good thing. And I think the more we see, the better people will begin to feel.
And
That's
I
great.
think as people understand that we are actually polluting our waters with our current systems. And if we keep on doing nothing, we're just going to keep on polluting it. So that there's really no choice. We have to stop.
We have to stop. Yeah.
We have to stop. Thank you, ladies. And I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Oh, and these three, they know it all.
Well, thank you. Thank you for attending, and really appreciate the support, and we will see you again in future meetings.
Thanks, Mary.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.